Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tips. My name is Julian, and in this episode we're going to be talking about late round draft steals. Basically, I'm going to be talking about guys who are going pretty late in drafts, but probably should not be. I'm also going to be mentioning quite a few guys that are pretty much not going at all in drafts that probably should be drafted in some leagues. And unlike some other fantasy YouTubers that I might only talk about 4 or 5 guys in these types of videos, I'm going to be talking about 22 guys so you can make the right decision for your type of league. Before we get started though guys, please leave a like, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and be sure to follow me on Twitter at Fantasy Tips. And if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down below. Let's jump right into it now, and let's start with my first late round draft steal in Brad Marchand. Now Brad Marchand is someone who's injured, but it's recently been announced that he should be back following American Thanksgiving. So what I did was I projected him and what a season would be like for him playing 62 games, because if he comes back right after American Thanksgiving, he'll miss the first 20 games of the season, and that's it. Now, when I projected him, I used his career average shooting percentage, and I used about the same amount of shots last year, just narrowed down to 62 games instead of 70 like he had last year. And basically, I used his career average shooting percentage to basically say how many goals he's going to get, and then I used the averages from last year's assists to get how many assists he's going to get. That gave me 33.9 goals and 42.5 assists. Basically, when you put everything together, he is a top 50 player in terms of last year's stats. So even though he's going to miss 20 games this year, he's probably going to be a top 50 player. Now, obviously, he's going to miss the first 7-ish weeks of the season, so that's definitely going to hurt your fantasy team a little bit. However, his ADP is so late that actually it's not really going to hurt your fantasy team that much picking him in like the 8th or 9th round where he's going right now in drafts. Now, as long as you have a couple of IR spots to throw him on, getting him this late in the draft is a dream come true. We all know that he's a top 25 talent in the league, and he will be a very, very big reason why you win your fantasy playoffs this year. My next late round draft steal is Roope Hintz, and I know I've talked about him in other videos, and I know that he is a natural center, but guys, he's going so late at an ADP of 133.5 currently, and last year, he finished as the 56th best fantasy player. If he finishes anywhere near that, he's an absolute steal at that current ADP, and I think he's very, 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 very good value where he's currently being drafted. He's someone that if you do manage to draft at that ADP before picking too many centers before that, you're going to be setting yourself up really nicely to win the season this year. Then I have Valeri Nichushkin of the Colorado Avalanche, currently going at an ADP of 149.4, and last year he finished the 58th best fantasy player in terms of fantasy points per game. He had an awesome season last year, and obviously a couple of things are different, right? He doesn't have Nazem Kadri on his line, so that might hurt him a little bit, but based on the lines that the Avalanche used in the playoffs last year, it was Lehkonen on the top line with McKinnon and with Mikko Rantanen, and it was Landeskog playing on that second line. So if that second line is something like Newhook, Nichushkin, and Landeskog, that's a pretty good second line. Nichushkin's going to get a lot of opportunities this year to put up points once again like he did last year. I really, really liked his output last year, and if he can put up anything even remotely close to that, he's going to have himself a really solid year. Plus, he's only one injury away from getting on that top power play. Really, really like Nichushkin this year at that current ADP. Then at an ADP of 157.4, that's where Vincent Trocheck's currently going. And that's really, really late. Last year he finished as a top 100 player in leagues that count hits. And this year he's joining the New York Rangers, where he's going to be playing on their second line with Artemi Panarin, as well as that top power play with Panarin, Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, and Adam Fox that was so deadly last year. Yeah, I like me Vincent Trocheck. He's definitely going to put up more points than last year. And that power play is definitely going to help his fantasy outlook. Obviously, he is a natural center, which is why he is going this late. But I think he's very, very good value where he's currently being drafted. If you're not in a hits league, I don't like him quite as much, but I still think he's pretty good value. All right, so this next one's for Bangers League specifically. Tanner Jeannot at an ADP of 161.3. He was a rookie last year, managed to score 41 points, as well as he had the second most hits in the league and the third most penalty minutes in the league. Basically, he's a budget Brady Tkachuk you can get later in the draft. He's going to do a lot for you, especially if you do count penalty minutes and hits in your league. If you don't count penalty minutes in your league, I still think he's a very, very good value where he's currently being drafted. He gives you a safe floor every single night, and he was a rookie last year, so he can only get better. Definitely like Tanner Jeannot at his current ADP. If you don't have hits in your league, though, don't draft him. And then I have Tyler Bertuzzi, who finished the 81st best player in terms of fantasy points per game and is being drafted at almost double that ADP. He's someone that gives you a really safe floor because he shoots over 3 times per night and is playing on a really, really good line with Larkin and with Lucas Raymond, as well as that top power play in Detroit. And that line was so good last year for Detroit, and I expect it to be even better this year, a little bit better for that plus minus as well. I'm expecting Bertuzzi to have a really good year, and I'm expecting him to be allowed into Canada this year. All right, then I have Tyler Toffoli at an ADP of 164.9, and he finished basically just around the range where he's currently being drafted last year. So why am I so high on him? Well, this year, I think he's going to have some really, really good line mates. He's going to be playing on a top line with Elise Lindholm and probably with Jonathan Huberdeau. That's the line that I'm projecting for Tyler Toffoli. He's going to be playing once again on that top calorie power play as well, and I just don't see how he can't do better than he finished last year with that deployment. Toffoli is someone who is a really, really good player. He's a lot of fun to watch on the ice, and he's a fan favorite anywhere he goes. I think Toffoli is going to have himself a really nice year this year. And then I have Boone Jenner, who's currently being drafted with an ADP of 166.7. He's another natural center, so obviously that position is not the most valuable. Last year scored 44 points in 59 games, but what I really do like about Boone Jenner is he kind of helps you out a little bit everywhere. He shoots the puck a really nice amount. He also hits a little bit and also even blocks a shot per game, which is pretty good for a forward, so he's kind of helping you out a little bit everywhere. And this year, I'm projecting him on a line with Patrik Laine and Johnny Gaudreau. Last year, he finished as the 91st best fantasy player, and this year, I see him finishing higher than that, playing with Johnny Gaudreau and Patrik Laine. Could be a really deadly line. Could see Boone Jenner having a really, really solid year for you this year. The next guy on this list is not a steal per se, but he's really good value where he's currently being drafted. It's hard to find really good value defensemen at this point in the draft. At 167.5, Josh Morrissey is someone who puts up some really solid peripherals with hits and blocks and should be slated to play once again on that top power play in Winnipeg, so he should put up some decent points for you this year as well. Should probably finish somewhere where that ADP is, but definitely really, really good value late in the draft. The only thing to note, though, is that if you don't have hits in your league, he's less good value here. Next, at an ADP of 169.9, I have Nick Schmaltz, who's only being drafted in 21% of leagues, which is absolutely crazy considering how he finished the year last year with Clayton Keller, was over a point per game for a good couple of months there, had some crazy chemistry with Clayton Keller. Now, while I don't expect him to be able to do that the entire season, I'm expecting a really strong season from Nick Schmaltz, and it looks like Clayton Keller is going to be ready for Game 1 of the fantasy season, which means Nick Schmaltz is going to have some solid value this year. He should be owned in a lot more leagues, can definitely help you win your league this year. And then I have Mason Marchment, who I did talk about in my top 100 players video. He's someone that managed to score almost a point per game playing on the third line in Florida. Also gives you a decent floor there with hits, and I think that he may get deployed on Dallas' second line. Now, obviously, we haven't seen him play for another team, so we don't know how he's going to adjust or if that last year was a complete blip and a complete fluke. But Marchment is definitely someone that drafting this late at 171.9 could definitely pay huge dividends for you because he was a top 60 player last year in terms of fantasy points per game, which is absolutely crazy. Could definitely be a huge steal at this range in the draft, but you're definitely flipping a coin with this one. Now, in past videos, I've already mentioned Binnington and Merzlikins as potential steals for goaltenders, so that's why I decided to go with a different goalie here with John Gibson, currently going on an ADP of 177.7. Now, the Anaheim Ducks are going to be a pretty decent team this year. I don't expect them to be a playoff team or anything like that, but they're going to try to contend a little bit for a playoff spot, and that's why I think John Gibson, he's really good value here because he's going to get the majority of the starts. I think he's going to put up some decent save percentages, and I think that overall he's going to have himself a really, really good season if he can stay healthy, like him here at this ADP. Then I have Viktor Arvidsson, who's going insanely late at an ADP of 183.3. Last year he finished as the 110th best fantasy player, which isn't particularly bad. He also gives you a really, really nice floor with the shots on goal. He shoots a lot, so that's definitely good for categories leagues as well. He's only 25% rostered, and I think people aren't drafting him or are drafting him really late because of the fact that he's currently listed as injured. Now, he did have surgery in May, and his recovery time was listed from 3 to 5 months. So at the very worst, he's going to be ready mid-October, which is when the season begins. So I don't think he's going to miss any games at all, and I think he'll be good to go playing on a line with Jeannot and Moore. It was a very, very good line last year, and I think Arvidsson's going to have himself a really, really solid year. Moving on to his line mate, Trevor Moore, and onto guys that do not have an ADP currently. Trevor Moore is an absolute steal this year. Now, last year, in the first 3 months of the year, he only had 7 points. Yet, he still ended up as a top 200 player in fantasy last year. That just goes to show you just how well he did in those last few months of the year. He was absolutely insane. Played super well on that line with Jeannot and Arvidsson. I'm expecting him to play on that line once again. I'm expecting a really, really strong season from Trevor Moore. If you're in a really deep league and you don't know who to draft in really, really deep rounds, Trevor Moore is someone that you should be targeting. The next guy on this list, Andrei Kuzmenko, coming straight from Russia. After having a pretty good season in the Russian leagues last year, is a huge, huge question mark this year. The good thing is he's not being drafted in a lot of leagues, and you can probably take him with the last round of your draft in a super, super deep league. He's only 11% rostered, and he's someone who's probably going to get some top 6 time in Vancouver, and who knows, he could potentially shine. I'm not super high on him. I don't think he's going to be this amazing player, but you never know. There's a huge chance that he could break out and be a solid fantasy producer for you this season. And going this late in the draft, you can throw a last round draft pick at him in a super deep league. It's probably worth taking the chance on him. And then at 9% rostered, I have MacKenzie Blackwood. And he could potentially be the starter this year in New Jersey and could potentially put up some really decent stats. Obviously, he's struggled pretty heavily in the last few years, but hopefully this year he's healthy and is ready to go. Otherwise, Vanecek is going to become the starter in New Jersey and will get the majority of the starts. Right now, it looks like it's going to be a tandem. That's what they've been saying. But if Blackwood comes out this year and looks really, really good, he could get the majority of the starts and could be an absolute steal at only 9% rostered right now and is not being drafted in most leagues. Yeah, he's someone that I'll throw a dart at with the last pick in my draft if I'm desperate for a goalie. Next, I have Reilly Smith, who's only being drafted in 9% of leagues. He was a top 140 player in some leagues, top 175 player at least in other leagues. I think he's someone who's an absolute steal right now. He shot at only 10.7% last year, where his career average is 12%, and Vegas had an off year. So I expect Reilly Smith's numbers to go up significantly this year. And honestly, if you're in a super deep league, he's a pretty good pick, super late in the draft. He's pretty safe. Next, I have Jack Quinn, who's only owned in 8% of leagues, which is absolutely crazy. I expect him to compete for the Calder Trophy this year. I think he's going to do really, really well. I think he's going to score a lot of goals. I think Buffalo's going to give him a really, really good opportunity to really show what he's made of and compete for that Calder and really get top 6 minutes and maybe top power play time. I think Jack Quinn's going to have himself a really amazing year. Throw your last pick of the draft at Jack Quinn because he could really pay off. Worst case, he doesn't, but you're using super late picks, so what difference does it make, really? The next guy on this list is for hits and bangers league, and with the current pace that he was on last year, obviously he didn't play a lot of games, got injured pretty early on, but what ended up as the 113th best fantasy player, which is pretty good for Brandon Tanev. Now, obviously, Seattle has added some better players to their team, so he may not be as high on the depth chart as he was last year, so I don't expect his points to be as high. But the dude hits like a crazy man. He's going to be the #1 guy probably in hits this year in terms of hits per game. And I think he's going to have himself a really, really good year. And this late in the draft, only 7% rostered, he's definitely someone that could help your team if you're in a league that counts hits or if you're in a bangers league. Next, I have Nick Paul, who's only being rostered in 6% of leagues right now. If you look only at his stats after he was traded to Tampa Bay, in terms of fantasy points per game, he was a top 140 player. Now, obviously, that shooting percentage was a little bit high, and that should come down a little bit. However, Cirelli is injured, so there's a good chance that Nick Paul gets top 6 minutes, at least to start the season. And the top 6 in Tampa includes guys like Kucherov, Stamkos. Nick Paul's in line to do really well again, at least to start the year, at the very least. And I think he's going to have himself a pretty good season overall. He's definitely a good, sneaky, late round pick. And last but not least, at only 5% rostered is Adam Henrique, one of the most underrated players in the NHL every single year. He was a top 140 fantasy player last year, and he was even better if you don't count hits in your league. Adam Henrique is someone who's going to be getting second line minutes again, possibly top power play time, and that second line isn't too bad with Ryan Strome and Max Comtois or Vetrano, whoever ends up playing there on that second line. It's not too bad at all, and Adam Henrique is a very talented player, and at only 5% rostered, super deep in your draft. He's someone who's super reliable and is a pretty solid pick. And last but not least, I have Justin Schultz, who's a really off-the-radar defenseman pick that I'm looking at this year. Now, right now, it's Vince Dunn who's projected to man the top power play in Seattle. But Vince Dunn was not very good last year, looked really bad pretty much everywhere on the ice, and didn't do particularly well on that top power play, even when Giordano was traded away. Justin Schultz, in the past, has shown some proficiency manning a top power play, and he's a pretty decent offensive defenseman. If Dunn continues to struggle, it could be Justin Schultz that sees that top power play spot in Seattle and could make a really good off-the-radar defenseman pick for this year. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Do you agree with my picks? Do you think these guys are going to have some pretty solid years? Why are they being drafted so late? Let me know down in the comments. As usual, guys, please leave a like, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. And if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down in the description. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.